I'd love to be able to welcome tonight Maggie May. Maggie May is one of the great voices in the FASD community. She is passionate about being an FASD ambassador and advocate, and is eloquent in her descriptions of living with FASD. Maggie May, thank you so much for coming and joining us tonight. I know it's been a bit frantic as you've just come straight off one of our amazing friendship groups that we run here at FASD Awareness and you host. So thank you for that. No respite for you. Straight in, a cup of tea in hand and ready to go. So without further ado, can you give us a little bit of an insight as to really a brief background about your understanding of how you came into foster care? What's the history behind that?
So I guess my foster parents at the time, who are now my adopted parents, they were very, very open. So nothing was ever hidden about why I was in care. And so, I grew up knowing the effects that alcohol had on my family. I'm the youngest of 7 siblings. And they were all affected by my mom drinking. But out of the 7 siblings, I'm the only one who actually got an official diagnosis. And even in Ireland, it's near impossible to get one, so I'm quite privileged. And I guess for me, when I'm kind of talking about, my experience being in care and having it, I was lucky in the fact that many kids in Ireland go through 5 or 6 social workers through their time in care, and I only had one. So she knew me from the day I went into care at 3 months until I was adopted at 18. So there was never any confusion, and she knew what my needs were. But even then, my story is kind of unique with I got my diagnosis, but I wasn't told I had FASD until much later on. So
what age was that? When were you told about your diagnosis?
So I was diagnosed at 5. And of course, at that age, I didn't know what I was being diagnosed for. And, these words FASD was kind of sprung around, and it was never explained to me. So I grew up thinking everyone in the world has FASD. It wasn't anything special. But it wasn't until I was about 13 that actually somebody sat down, because my foster parents got permission to finally tell me. And they actually explained to me what FASD was, and the fact that my behaviors weren't because I was a bad person, it was because of my FASD. And I suppose the reason they had been told not to tell me was because I was still having contact with my birth family, and they didn't want me to feel anger towards my birth mom. But in fact, I was the biggest advocate for her, being like, I'm so against blaming and shaming. My mom was an alcoholic. Her husband was an alcoholic. My grandparents were alcoholics. She grew up in a culture where people drank when they were pregnant. They weren't told otherwise. The doctors were saying that you could drink while you were pregnant. And I love my mom. And I think if she knew now, she wouldn't have drunk. But she didn't know then. So why should I blame her for something that she didn't know?
I got to say, that's one of the most refreshing approaches and attitudes. And I think probably for you as well, having come to that conclusion in your own mind, can you give us an indication about what sort of age you were when you felt like that? Or was that immediate?
I guess it wasn't immediate. So, I went through, being sat down and explained what FASD was and how it would affect me. But for me, I just kind of brushed it off. And it wasn't until I saw my friends, start to learn how to drive, and we're talking about going to college, and that wasn't in the cards for me at the time. And that's when it really, I went through a dark period where I didn't blame my mom, but I definitely was not as nice about it as I am now.
Sure.
Because it was then starting to affect that this isn't going away.
Yeah.
And so I went through the period of this isn't fair. Why me? This isn't my fault. Why did it have to happen to me? And that went on for about 2 years until I was about 17.
I think what I'd like to do, I mean, I'd like to come back to that one as well, because I think that's a really important point. That transition as you go from into adulthood is such a crucial period in everybody's life. And I'd be really interested to hear how you coped, what strategies and coping mechanisms you used at that time. But if I can just take it back a little bit to when you were talking, it was first explained to you what FASD was. Do you remember your response at that time or your understanding of FASD?
So I suppose at that time, I was hating myself because I couldn't understand why I kept making the same mistakes over and over again and I wouldn't learn. And then it was my mom sat down and was, and she did it in a very gentle way where she was like, this isn't your fault. We've been putting in tools, but the reason you have blow ups and the reason you keep making the same mistakes, that's not you. It's your FASD, but there's ways around it, and we are going to be, we're going to find solutions, and we did, in quite a lot of the ways. And she just I think I was just at the right space at that time when she did explain it, was the fact, and then the fact that she would put it together with, strategies and solutions and would talk me through every situation. And I suppose the way me and my mom kind of got on was the fact that if I went down the elevator, she'd be down with me, and together we'd climb out of that hole together.
It's so important, the actual communication of what FASD is. And also for you in that case, did you feel that having a diagnosis and understanding the diagnosis, with hindsight, would you have liked to have known earlier?
I get asked this question so many times. It's great. And I'm going to be so honest. I think if I had been told earlier, I would have used it to my advantage. I totally would have, been like, I can't empty the dishwasher. My brain won't let me. I totally would have used it as a scapegoat.
I love your honesty. And I know we've spoken many times about various different aspects over the last couple of months, but I think you're right. I think, certainly one of the questions I was going to ask you was going back to the period beforehand where females frequently use coping mechanisms and strategies. They're very astute at being able to do that. Can you give us a bit of an insight as to when you really discovered that you were different at school, unique, let's say?
I guess I was so oblivious, and like in hindsight, I'm like, wow, it was really obvious. So there's just small things like I didn't have any friends. Because I would try so hard to fit in that I would end up not fitting in because I was trying so hard. Just maturity was a huge aspect, in some ways I was way more mature than my peers, but in other ways I was nowhere near as mature. And the fact that, at the time I thought it was just my parents being so overprotective, like so uncool and so overprotective. The fact that, they wouldn't let me go for sleepovers. Hindsight, greatest decision ever made. Would have done terribly. And, just I didn't have as much freedom as people my own age did.
Can I just take you back there? Can you explain why it wouldn't have worked? Why you think it wouldn't have worked now? Because there's a lot of people, we've got a lot of people attending today that that might not have come across FASD before, and would be really interested in hearing your some of your scenarios that are typical you, that you understand so well now, but when you were at school, had you been put in those scenarios, how you would have probably reacted?
Yeah, I guess, it's, and I did try going to a sleepover once, and it was just a disaster. It was a different routine. There wasn't as many rules, and I struggled with that. Even though I hate rules, I love rules apparently. And it was just sensory overwhelming. It was a different bed. It was, they were staying up all night chatting, and all I wanted to do was sleep, but I couldn't sleep because they were chatting. I have ADHD, so of course my ADHD was also going rampant. It was just all these small things that ended up in just a sensory overload, to the point where I was just told my friend's mom I wanted to go home.
Yeah.
And of course, then that made me different from the rest of my peers because I went home.
Can you give us some specific examples of when you were at school in education and you were oblivious to the fact that you had FASD, but had you already understood that you were different from others? Or did you mentioned earlier that you were a little bit oblivious, but what sort of things now with hindsight then would you say that you acted differently to your peers?
I guess I had the diagnosis, so around me there were supports put in place that at the time I was oblivious to by my teachers. So, when my teacher could tell I was getting distracted at the time, there was chalkboards. So I would deliver the chalkboard wiper to the next classroom, as that was my job. Hindsight, I just needed a break from the classroom. That 2 minutes walk from one classroom to the other was what my brain needed. So that when I came back, my attention was back. I also was put at the front of the class because I have severe anxiety disorder. So if I was doing a test and I saw people still writing and I was done, I would go into a panic being like, I haven't written enough, oh dear. And that would throw me. And also I sat on my own, which at the time I thought that was so unfair, but actually it was no distractions.
It's very interesting. You mentioned that the school already have the strategies in place, because quite honestly, that's quite rare, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
And so I get the impression from this that your parents, your foster parents, your parents were instrumental in working very closely with the school. And obviously, the example that you are today shows just what good strategies they put in place for you to scaffold you and support you throughout your childhood.
Yeah, I mean, I think all the teachers feared when my mom was going to school for meetings because she was a wreck to be, yeah. And my mom did a lot of research at that time, so she was ringing around Canada and America and everywhere, because at the time in Ireland FASD wasn't known, and really still it's not that known. And the school put in really simple, non-expensive strategies. One of them was a water bottle that you have to suck, because for me sucking something was grounding. And my parents were very adamant that they didn't want me to stick out too much because I was already sticking out. So the school brought in a hydration program where every student could have a water bottle. And I think after a month of doing it, everyone's test results were up by 20%. As in, it wasn't just mine, it was because it's a technique that works for anyone, really. And that's still going. 15 years later, they still have that hydration program in place.
Brilliant. I mentioned earlier that there'll be a lot of teachers, there'll be a lot of social care professionals on here, doctors as well, that want some insights into FASD. Now, can you give us and them some of the ideas? What does a diagnosis of FASD for you mean? What is that diagnosis? And what are some of the symptoms, if you like, of that you would display?
So I guess for me, like in Ireland, having a diagnosis doesn't mean you get any extra supports. No. It didn't matter. Like we fought, and FASD is just one of those in Ireland where you fall through all the cracks. But for me, after I was told I had the diagnosis, I didn't feel alone anymore. I was all of a sudden, it wasn't just me. And so I went onto Facebook and into a group called Blind Broken Wings. And I was a lurker for quite a while, just reading about other people posting, oh, I always wear my jacket, even if it's 28 degrees outside. And all of a sudden I was picking up on these, being like, I do that too. Or there's other sensory stuff. And I was like, that's me. And all of a sudden that was where, for the first time, I felt like, actually, I'm not alone. There's other people like me. And at that time also, I wasn't as reliant on my mom for strategies. I think I was about 19 at the time. So I was going towards Flying Broken Wings for, hey, look, this happened. Did this happen to anyone else? What worked for you? But I mean, like I got suspended from my primary school for jumping off tables because of my ADHD. And just having no impulse control, really. Which
interesting, you bring up ADHD, and something that we've mentioned quite often in our support groups and also in our webinars is that, of course, FASD, for those that aren't aware, FASD is the umbrella term, isn't it? And it's often misunderstood because it's an umbrella term. People and a lot of doctors, they can see and they identify with autism and they identify with ADHD, and quite often they see those as the main diagnosis. In fact, it's not. There are about 423 or 428 co-occurring conditions that work alongside and can work alongside and with FASD. So it's that umbrella term. What does that mean for you?
I guess for me, because like I've got ADHD, I've got anxiety disorder, I'm dyslexic. At the time, all of a sudden, there's all these little things, but actually when you put them all together, it summed it up. Whereas before, I'd go to doctors and they'd only focus on my anxiety disorder. They wouldn't look at the bigger picture. So, they'd give me something for the anxiety disorder, but not for, like, I also have like sensory when it comes to eating. So I forget to eat. I don't feel hunger. So, they'd address some issues and not the others. So it just wasn't balanced until you went in and you're just like, no, I don't just have this, I have this, I have this, I have this. You have to look at it at the whole picture, not just on one aspect. And doctors really struggle to understand that.
I think it's a really important point to make. And one of the other areas that I'd like to sort of tap in on now is, as you mentioned, being a female, you develop strategies and techniques. Can you give us some of the other strategies that you used when you started going into adulthood, if you like, as well, transitioning?
Yeah, so I guess, like I mentioned, I had an issue with impulse control. So one of those things was, my parents couldn't leave like their wallet or their purse lying around because I'd take money. But I would take money with the concept that, oh, I'm going to go and do something nice for them. I'm going to go and use that money to buy them something nice. So it would always start off with, I took the money so I could do something for them. And then I would go to the shop and see a chocolate bar and be like, I'll buy myself the chocolate bar, and whatever's left, I'll spend on them. And so in the end, we kind of, and then, this went on for years and they never got anything. I always spent it on myself. But then we kind of, and they would do everything. They'd have locks and everything, and I'd tamper with them and break into them, and until we got like a post box. So in the kitchen now we have a post box. So my hand doesn't fit through. I've had my hand stuck in there quite a few times. Doesn't work. And so for that, it was for my protection and for their protection. But I was the one that asked for it. I was just like, you know what, this is something I can't control. We've tried different strategies. If the temptation isn't there, then the impulse isn't there. So it's just removing the temptation.
And understanding as well the reasons behind it. And were you able to communicate those? Or did you find that, you know, as a young teenager, if somebody sees their wallet being taken, a parent or a teacher, first reaction is to think theft, right, I'm going to reprimand. Now, let's talk about at school. You know, I know your school was quite different because you had that wraparound service, but at the same time, when an individual with FASD is disciplined, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because we've been working with some of our parent carer support groups on the whole issue around disciplining an individual with FASD.
Yeah, so one incident would be, I would be taught like maths, so it might have been addition, and I would go home. So we'd learn it that day in the classroom. I'd go home, there might be 10 questions on it. I would have forgotten how to do it. I mean, I would sit there for 4 hours, and, you know, my mom would be kind of, Maggie, it's in the journal, you learned how to do it today. It's 3 hours ago. And I would sit there for 4 hours, nothing. There'd be no recollection. And then, so of course that bit of my homework wouldn't get done. And then the next day, go into the classroom and, you know, I'd remember how to do it. And I'd be able to do those questions. So, you know, my teachers were always just like, you know, she's just pulling a fast one. She's just not wanting to do it. Until, I guess, for some reason, one of my teachers came home one day for a meeting with my mom, and he just saw me sitting there doing that subject that he taught me that day. And he was just like, she wasn't lying. I mean, I can see on her face, she is trying, and it's not there. And so my mom did a bit of research, and it was just a transitioning. I couldn't transition that information from the school into my work at home.
Now that's a fascinating point. I'd like to touch on that whole transitioning. Can you explain to people what that is and why that is difficult?
I guess for me, and I guess everyone's different, I couldn't do homework at home because home was my safe spot. Home was where I could be myself. I didn't have to have my educational brain on. I didn't have to put a mask on and pretend to be someone I wasn't. Home was where I could be myself. I could have blow-ups, or, you know, I could just be who I was. Whereas when I was in school, I'd almost put a mask on to act like everyone else around me and try and be like everyone else around me. So for me, it was two separate things. There's school where I do homework and, you know, that, but once I'm home, that's it. I shut off. So I finally got an IEP where it was just like homework isn't an option. So I would either they'd let me finish like 10 minutes early in the subject and I'd get the homework done, or they would be like, okay, yes, today's homework will be today's homework in the classroom if she finishes one of the subjects first. Because, yeah, we just can't transition information sometimes from one place to another.
Yeah, that's beautifully explained. Thank you. It helps a lot of people understand that side of things. And I think, you know, we touched on discipline. And as I mentioned, some of the support groups that we've been running this week have been about working with positive reinforcement and the importance of working with positive reinforcement. And one of the quotes I'd like to give you today, which I found a really good quote, and I had to bring it up today, was about a lot of the lessons that we've learned about positive reinforcement, where teachers and parents, what we can learn for those that have a that are neurotypical and those that are neurodiverse, and actually the lessons that are learnt for both. So teachers we learn as much from adapting our methods of parenting and teaching as others do in a lifetime of education. So we have here this lovely quote: "We can't harm a neurotypical child by treating them as though they are neurodiverse, but we can harm," so on the other page, "we can harm a neurodiverse child by treating them as though they are neurotypical." And I think that is a really useful quote to remember for so many people and parenting. Can you give us some examples where your parents, some of the best strategies that your parents use, some of the best techniques to get the best out of you?
So I guess like my mom kind of has a motto where like, if you put any expectations on me, I will fail. But if there's no expectations, I will fly. Because if I don't feel like I'm expected to perform a certain way, I will outperform. Yeah. It's, there's no box that I will fit into. It's the box has to be made around me.
I love that. That's excellent. Thank you. I'm going to move on a little bit, because I think, as we spoke about transition, and of course one of the most important transitions in anybody's life is from childhood to adulthood. Can you tell us about that period for you?
Oh, that was a fun one. I guess for me, it was very different to say what my adopted neurotypical siblings were. For me, when I finished secondary school, college wasn't on the cards for me. It was, that was something I never planned to do. I just wasn't ready. And also it was kind of a out of reach goal. And also I was my parents are trying to give me the freedom that an 18-year-old should have. But at the same time, they were trying to be in the background and make sure that I knew they were there. And I definitely pushed boundaries. I pushed so many boundaries. Also, that stage was when I kind of was coming out of my dark period of accepting my FASD. So my mom gives training in Ireland about FASD, and before I was 18, I was still in care. So, I couldn't go with her, and she couldn't use my name. She kind of referred to me as like child A. And then I got adopted, and she asked if I wanted to go with her to help and maybe do what I'm doing now, which is kind of talk about what it was like. And I was kind of like, okay, fine, if I have to. And I remember I was, doing what I was doing now, and I was just describing what a day in the life for me was. And a foster parent was just like, "That's my daughter. You've just described my daughter." And I was
on the chat here today. Actually, I've been scanning through some of the chat, and there's an awful lot of love for you here, I've got to say. But that's very interesting. That's come up exactly today. So sorry, carry on. Yeah.
And I suppose, she was just like, "That's my daughter." I think I was talking about the fact that I hate metal spoons and ceramic cups. It's century, no. Hence the plastic cup.
Yeah.
Plastic, no, I can't handle it. And she was just like, she'd never thought that might have been the issue until she put what I said and what she knew. And she's like, "Oh, that's why she always blows up when we're having cups of tea." And for me, that was the turning point where I was like, I have FASD. It's not going anywhere. I can hate it, or I can try and do something good with it. And I guess that's when I started looking more into doing advocacy, and I was more open to being honest and open about my life and how FASD affected me. Before that, I wouldn't talk. I was 16 before I gave my foster parents their first hug, let alone say I love you. I was just, no. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I also, you've proved already, we've brought you into FASD awareness as an ambassador, and you're doing amazing work for us with our friendship groups. And can you tell a little bit about what you do in the friendship groups and, you know, the bonds that are developing there? Because you speak, as I said earlier, so eloquently about FASD, and you have a natural affinity and you draw elements out of people and the confidence. This is what I've loved. I've loved the friendships, the bonds, and the confidence that's developing. Can you talk a little bit about the two groups that you run and host for us?
Yeah. So I do the 16s plus, and there's about 4 of us there at the moment. And I remember when I first joined, you know, we were all very quiet and very timid, and, you know, we'd just be like, so, you know, what did you do today? And what's your favorite? Whereas now, you know, we'll be jumping on, and food is a main topic, movies. I know it's an hour long and the hour just flies. But also when we're talking, like, we do talk about, like, in not so obvious way about how FASD affects us. You know, some of them are in university and they kind of talk about, you know, when their routine is changed or when a lecturer isn't in, that throws them. But we do it in a way where you're comfortable and you're not made to feel like you have to say something, where you can just kind of nod, yeah. And yeah, it's the highlight of my month. I love it.
Yeah. I think one of the things that has been a real insight for us is that when you sit with the groups, everybody gives each other the time to answer and respond. And this is what we've all been trying to encourage families to do as part of the parenting skill with an individual with FASD, and for teachers to do as well, and learning support assistants. Now, in addition to that, one of the most incredible points that we realized was we had a discussion, I think you remember, that we spoke about how others view you as individuals with FASD. First of all, there's a lack of understanding of what FASD is. But then there was a great comment that said, well, we hate being viewed as victims. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's a really important point, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, and what I love about, like, FASD Awareness UK and so many of the other charities and awareness is the fact that finally they're kind of involving us. For so many years it's, you know, doctors and stuff talking about us, but they don't involve us. Whereas now, you know, we're being invited to webinars, we're being invited to sit on panels and actually talk about what it's like for us, because, you know, the doctors might know all the medical jargon and, you know, the physical changes and all of that, but people on the spectrum and with FASD are the ones who have to live it. We are the ones who know it inside out. And, you know, I'd say 80% of the time, people with FASD want to tell people. They're happy for people to come up at conferences and be like, I have FASD, ask me any question, and they will answer honestly. And, you know, they love educating people. They love telling their stories. They love sharing tips and strategies that might help someone else. We're very open and we're very honest. If that hasn't been honest, but we're not victims, as in we have FASD, but with the right support, we can be like anyone else. I mean, I went to college, which I didn't think I ever would. My parents didn't think I would. My teachers had told me, don't even bother, because it's never going to happen. And, you know, with the right supports put in place, I did a Bachelor of Arts. I did first year in psychology. I had a job. And it was just, we're not victims. This happened to us, but actually we're very strong people and we can find solutions. We find ways around it. You know, we might take a bit longer than other people our own age. And, you know, some things we might never be able to do. For me, I'm never going to drive, and it's a good thing too. I'm far too nervous. And I know that's just a joke in a family, that I would probably run someone over before I even left the gate of my house. And it's true. But we're not victims. And we have voices. And we want to be heard, really.
Can I ask you as well that, I mean, that whole passage there sums up beautifully why you do so well what you do. But I'd like to talk a little bit. One of the forgotten areas so often are siblings, and siblings or birth children or other foster children in placements as well, of how they manage and their voice in the care of individuals in the family that have FASD. Can you tell us a little bit from your experience about those relationships?
Yeah, I guess like I need to count now. I have an older sister who's like my adopted parents' biological kids. And I have two older brothers, and I have a younger sister. And I guess they were so excited when I came into the household, as in at that time didn't know I had FASD. And, then, at the age of 5, I got a diagnosis of FASD, and the social worker turned around to my parents being like, you can give her back if you want. This isn't what you signed up for. And it was my siblings that were like, no, we're not giving her back. She's our sister now. And yeah, there was times where, they wouldn't bring friends over. So they kind of got used to me having huge tantrums. But, my brother was always up for like just coming to play with me in my sensory room. We would often play hide and seek in the dark and other things. He was the fun one. He's great fun. My older sister, there's 10 years between us, but she would always be on hand if I ever needed anything that I couldn't go to my mom to. She'd be there. And they were very accepting. I think at times they were definitely like, this isn't fair. She's getting away with murder. If we had done that at that age, you would have killed us. But at the same time, they didn't hold it against me. They were kind of just like, her needs are different. And I guess that's something in our household is all of, whether FASD or not, everyone's different. So, my little sister is getting away with things that I would never have gotten away with. And at times I was very jealous. And now I'm just like, oh, okay, fine. You just fine. And even now, we'd have discussions where, we'd be talking about all of my major blow-ups that have ever happened, and we'll just laugh about it and be like, yeah, that was a good one.
And I really get a very strong impression from you, having spoken to you over the last couple of months, about the incredible understanding and support and network. And I include, with that, your parents, your siblings, and your teaching staff at school as well. And I would imagine as well through your time at university, fantastic achievement. And all of that network of support and understanding with that scaffolding, that's what is required. And you don't get that without communication. I think I get this strong impression that your parents are very, very good communicators, not only with you, but with everybody else around you. And that's a lesson that many of our attendees here today can really pick up on. I'd like to, can you just tell us, we always like finishing on positive, but throughout this has been a positive story and a message. I always knew it was going to be. But what I'd like to talk about is where you see your future.
I suppose it changes day to day. I guess I've already decided that, FASD and advocacy and educating is what I'm good at. And I never want to lose that. And, bringing, helping people to become the people they are. People with FASD are they need a little bit of help when it comes to confidence and, just finding themselves. But also I like having my foot in loads of different puddles, so to speak. So I like trying a bit of everything. So for the last 2 years, I've been on an egg farm, and that's been my job. I'm now making candles. I'm working with the Adult Leadership Committee and a university, Rochester University in America, and we're developing a health app specifically for people with FASD. I want to get another cat. Not allowed to get another cat. Want one. But yeah, for me, FASD is always going to be the main thing that I want to stick with. And for me, I want to like get as much education myself so that I can help others. So I love doing like online FASD courses and, seeing, yeah, they got that one right. That information's correct. But yeah, I don't really know where I'm going to be in 10 years, but definitely involved with FASD.
I'm sure of that. I'm absolutely sure of that. Now, just a few other little points that I think a lot of our attendees would really like to know. Can you give us, let's say, 10? No, make it 5. I'll count them. I'll keep them on my hand here. Can we have 5 of the most useful strategies that you use on a daily basis just to get by?
Coffee.
Coffee. Okay, all right. That's a given. I'm not going to include that one. No, that's a given. Go on.
As for me, there's a few things like when I get up in the morning, I have to be, half an hour before you can expect me to be human, before you can ask me to do anything. And my parents didn't understand that for so long until, they saw it in action, where I was like, I need that half an hour for me to I need it. Strategy, reminders to eat, because I don't feel hunger.
How do you reminders? What do you do to give yourself a reminder?
Parents are very good. I also set like reminders on my phone, being like, have you eaten today? Probably should. Also, I try and keep a strict routine kind of thing, even though I'm at home. It's, I have to be up at a certain time, lunch at a certain time. Otherwise, my day just disappears. Other strategies, I need to listen to music. And I guess
huge musical knowledge as well. When we've done our quizzes, that the music quizzes are absolutely phenomenal in our support groups. And the 11 to 16-year-old, the teenager group one, they've got such a vast knowledge, and you've heard them all. I love that. And as a musician myself, I find that very intriguing, because actually a lot of the great strengths, that's going to be one of the next questions I was going to ask, but music seems to be a big thing. Can I ask you about sleep routines? Have you had issues with sleep? Because a lot of families have issues around sleep.
Yeah, I don't sleep. Or at least, I've tried quite a lot of strategies. I've done like meditation before sleep. I've done hot milk and honey before sleep. And it kind of, there's two, so I might sleep for a few hours and then I'll wake up. But I've now figured out why I wake up, and that's because I'm hungry. So, I will go to the kitchen and eat some cheese or eat whatever's lying around, and then I'll go back to sleep. So these days, like, my parents leave stuff out that I know I can take, so I don't eat stuff I shouldn't, that they need for the next day. And sometimes, having a snack before bed, even though, most households like, no, you've had your dinner, you've had your snack, it's bed. It helps.
If you don't have your snack, you'll be awake.
Yeah, my mind just stays on the fact I'm hungry. And even though I might not be hungry at that point, I will be hungry.
I'm interested by this one, because we've been dealing quite a lot in our support groups around the sleep routine, and many have, because of the sensory overload issues that present themselves. A lot have completely stripped out rooms, so there is, and even the light on a sound device or a television that's turned off, they have to cover that. But because the individuals know that there's a light behind that, they'll peel that cover off, so you have to paint it over or Tipex it over or something. So there are so many things. Do you have any of those, any of the sensory?
My wall is full with dots.
Yes.
All of my walls are full of polka dots. For me, I don't, because I've become so aware to all my surroundings. Because I'm terrible sighted without my glasses on. So I've kind of gotten so used to making sure I've pretty much memorized everything in my room. But I definitely, like, when I was younger, it was a huge thing. I did have a stripped out room, because otherwise I'd be just focusing on one thing for the entire night, whether it was my light blinking slightly or a flickering light bulb. Flickering light bulbs are the worst. Just stuff like that. Whereas now I'm kind of not as hypersensitive to it. I mean, another thing, I got an electric blanket, which has been the best thing ever.
Is it slightly weighted?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we've one of our lads at home here, he's been lived with us for the last sort of 6-7 years, and for Christmas we got him, he's getting bigger and bigger, he's 16 now, and he grew out of his weighted blanket, and it had become threadbare as well, but we couldn't throw it because that was part of his routine. Now we got a heavy weighted blanket, and you put him, he looks like a mummy in a mask, you know, in a cask, and he'd just stay there, and he'll stay and he'd sleep so soundly with it. And this is something that we've, you know, one of the resources and strategies that we put in place for so many. So it's really interesting hearing you talking about that side of it, because, you know, I'm sure everybody here would be able to talk all night about it. And I can always, the time always flies by when I talk to you. But I'd just like to sort of finish by saying one of the great things about your work and your communication skills with people, what is the feeling that you get about where we are at this time? You know, having come through a childhood where you did have that support wraparound service, but still the general experiences were that there was very little support for individuals with FASD. The professionals, very few professionals knew about it. I've just read tonight as well that there are support groups for FASD in Ireland now as well. And, you know, Ireland's coming around. Scotland with their hubs have done some amazing work. And this whole UK Alliance is really trying to get the word out there. And now as well with the new NICE guidance, which will be coming in hopefully in 2022, everyone's going to have to start listening. Where do you see the FASD understanding going?
For me, like, there's been so much amazing work done on, you know, just bringing awareness that FASD exists. But for me, I guess what I really want to see is there's a lot of work being done in how to prevent it, but there's so much more work that needs to be done on supports for, like, you can prevent it, but what about for people who have FASD? I mean, I was looking to move out, and, you know, there's no assisted living for someone with FASD. There's no supports if you're an adult with FASD. So for me, what I'd really love to see is the fact that more support for people out there who have FASD would be great. But yeah, I mean, in the last 15 years, like all of a sudden Ireland has got these support groups and awareness campaigns and stuff, which they didn't have. I've seen so much positive changes, and the fact that there's just more and more things available through online support groups, like our monthly groups for people on the spectrum. There's groups for parents which all did not exist when I was growing up. So yeah, I'm very hopeful about the future.
I love that. I love that. We all are. Maggie May, on behalf of everybody here, thank you so much for your insights, your honesty, as always, and your eloquence. If you've got a young individual or an adult that would like to join our support groups hosted by Maggie May, please come onto our website. There is a whole section there where you can register an interest. We would love to have you join those friendship groups and build those bonds with like-minded individuals. As well, we have our support groups, which we run for parent carers, and they run every third Thursday of the month from 10:30 until 12 o'clock. Again, please register with that. And we do offer some online training as well. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And once again, thank you, Maggie May.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you very much, everyone.